Welcome to Chaos, Logos, Order, where we apply the ideas of Jordan Peterson in order to create lives of increasingly heroic meaning. With our hosts, Guy Sengstock of thecirclinginstitute.com and Mark Michael Lewis, that's me, from the game of heroicmeaning.com. We're going through Jordan Peterson's new book, Beyond Order, chapter by chapter. In this episode, we go through the Overture. So, welcome, Guy. What a pleasure, my friend.
Thank you. Welcome received. Welcome yourself, my friend.
So this is our kickoff of this process of going through the book Beyond Order, essentially chapter by chapter, to examine the ideas from a particular perspective. Right? Some people...
And what perspective would that be?
Well, I don't know. Let's talk about that. I'll tell you what I'm thinking. What are you thinking? You could say one thing I'm clear about is that I am a coach. Like my life is focused around the question, how do I make life better? How do I make my life better? I coach myself. I have this client. His name's Mark Michael Lewis. He's a squirrely son of a gun, but you put just the right kind of loving attention and pressure and accountability on him, he produces cool stuff. So like he's my main client, but then I have my actual clients. And the question is always, how do I use the ideas in order to further psychological well-being, phenomenological aliveness,
right,
spiritual depth? Now, from my perspective, Jordan Peterson also generates a lot of political awareness and political waves because his ideas have political implications. He takes political stances. Politics is like the hot button in the world. So if you say something political, you get views, and so people use his work for that, even though he doesn't really want to be that, but then he does want to be that. That whole thing, that's not what this is about. So to be clear, like, what do we want to focus on? It's not the politics side of it. It's not the sociological side of it, for me, and we're in agreement on this. It's how do we use these ideas in order to make our lives better, our clients' lives better, and for anyone who's watching this, like, how do you use my intelligence, Guy's intelligence? You know, what we've both been doing this coaching thing for 20 years, 25, 30 years.
Something like that,
some, depending on when we
like
started and stuff like that, and depending on what coaching is versus training, but somewhere in there. Like we've each worked with hundreds of clients, perhaps, you know, and we've got, you could say we've got our 10,000 hours in terms of working with people for this kind of psychological, phenomenological, spiritual realization to actually make your life better. And that's what this is about. Like, how do we use this? Okay, so that's my thought.
We saw a few patterns. Like one or two patterns in those 10,000 hours.
Wait. So you've noticed one or two patterns in human
patterns
in humans' capacity, how they approach their life and what it leads to, something like that.
Yeah. They kind of have a nature, we may say. Yeah. So one of the ways that I think that that for me, and you and I actually you had sent me a text. It was kind of a joke. We hadn't talked about Peterson at all. This was like, I think, a couple of years before he got pretty popular.
Sometime in 2015.
Something like that, right? And you're like, you texted me a joke is like, have you been distracted by the latest Peterson video? Question mark. And we hadn't even talked about it because there was such just that you texted me that and assumed I was watching it and didn't even have to ask me about it.
Either
says
that or
so much about what that world is, right? In our world,
it is so much part of our world. Maps of meaning, like especially maps of meaning. Like going back to maps of meaning, the lectures for maps of meaning. so much a part of our world that I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
are you being distracted by it? Because I am.
Yes.
and if you're not aware of this Peterson thing, oh my gosh, do I have something to introduce you to? But of course, you already did, because we're so crazy, we end up in these places.
Yes, totally. And part of, I think, how we end up in these places, and where we've made a lot of connection and deepened those patterns that we've seen with each other and experimented, and has been just the nature of whatever it is that I think Peterson's writing about in his books and talks about in his lectures, right, is very much a similar place that we've had our attention, right? In that we're looking at the patterns of being with people and with ourselves, and like our most, as you said, my most difficult client, myself.
Yes.
And that one of the things we've noticed is that a lot of times when you pay attention to something, like anybody pays attention to anything for a long period of time, what they pay attention to develops and unfolds for them. So like wine drinkers, right? Mm-hmm. I have a friend, my buddy Ron Bynum, who is kind of a mentor of mine. I'd go up to his place, and he'd bring out a thing of wine, and he'd pour us this glass, and he was pouring the glass. He'd have the story about the grapes and the families who and he would just, like a wine connoisseur. And mm-hmm. I would drink it, and I would basically taste, burning grape juice that wasn't sweet. But if we say from the wine's point of view, right? Mm-hmm. That's but from when he would drink it, from the wine's point of view, I would much rather be drunken by my buddy, right? Who has all these distinctions, because unless we have,
for lack of a better term, loves me. And therefore pays mm-hmm. attention to me and notices all of my facets and finds me beautiful.
Right. And all those facets that you can notice, you can only act on something that you notice, right? You can only behave.
You can only make a choice that you perceive.
Yeah, absolutely. So that whatever that pattern is of noticing, responding, that which you notice acts on you, and then you act on it, and then something like you and it becomes more open, more articulated, more intelligent, right? More attuned. That thing. Mm-hmm. I like to call that phenomenology, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I like to call that phenomenology. And I think Peterson spoke to both of us in the sense that he has his attention in a very similar place. However, he brought, what I really appreciated about him is he brought a whole kind of a scientific point of view on it, or like a hardcore research point of view, and all of the Jungian stuff, right? And kind of brought those together and synthesized it into this map of meaning. And I think he's definitely on the right track. And what I like about him and his work is I think he's on the right track, and I think he's right about a lot of things. Mm-hmm. But he's also grappling with those very things. He's not dogmatic, right? And if he was, I don't think I'd even pay attention to him. It's that, no, his work leads him to the next place in which a deeper question is asked, right? And you can tell. So I think what's one of the things that people really love about him is because when he talks, he's always talking about what he's in the midst of and he isn't quite sure on, right? And he's kind of, in some sense, he's always moving towards the thing that is still mysterious or still paradoxical. And that move, I think what I've seen with my clients when they have these experiences called kind of waking up to themselves, that's kind of what happens, is that you start to get oriented to that there's so much more that I'm seeing or experiencing, right? Because I'm now seeing and experiencing what I hadn't before. That the world of novelty, the world of mystery, the world of the intelligence that's beyond us that we don't quite understand, and that edge, right? That edge of chaos and order, I think, as he would say, we can actually kind of get attracted to be right on that edge in more and more profound ways. And as that happens, all the good stuff about being human, right, I think becomes possible.
Mm-hmm. Amen. If we're building a relationship with something, wine, and it's a loving relationship in this like fascination to the point of wonder, which leads to increasing levels of distinctions and perspicacity, being able to notice what is happening with increasing depth and precision. When we have that, on the one hand, we actually come up with typically a vocabulary, perhaps a technology, a series of systems, a way of understanding it. For example, you talk about wine, or the clearest example is diamonds, right? There's the clarity of the diamond, there's the color of the diamond, there's the cut of the diamond, how it's cut, and there's the carat, the weight of the diamond. Right? Yeah. And each of those are clearly defined. There's a community who agree on those. And so you can judge a diamond according to those criteria. So we build a set of best practices through our love. We distinguish the patterns. We name the distinctions. Right? And we create this thing. But if we're satisfied with that, it's like we create order. We reach into the chaos of the thing, and we move from burning grape juice to an entire loving vocabulary.
Yeah.
But then we've got that. Now, how do we relate to that? If we're going to call the unknown order, like if you just said, okay, wine is burnt grapes. Like it's burning grapes. Like it tank that. Yeah. I'm done. Right? Okay, I've created order out of that, and now I'm staying in the order.
Yeah.
And that order, on the one hand, is useful because you kind of have a relationship with wine, and it's okay, that's good enough. But it's limiting if you're stuck in that order.
Yeah. Or if the wine happens to be someone that you call like your wife or your husband.
Like something like that.
Yeah.
Like, because you know what
or your mom or your family, or
who this person is. They are that. You encapsulate them in some kind of order. That's who they are, and that's all they are, and I need not look further.
Yes.
This is order headed towards tyranny.
Yeah, and that's what the current book that he's talking about that we're going to be going through.
Yes. How do you go beyond each week, order?
Beyond that.
How do you go beyond that? What are the dangers of order? Once you've named something, once you have an understanding of it, if you just leave it there, what's the danger of that? What's the limitations of that? How do you go beyond that? Not how do you destroy that? How do you devalue order? No. How do you go beyond it? How do you refine it? How do you use it? But how do you use it to extend into this other thing, this chaos, the known order and the unknown chaos? And so I'll say one more thing to set more context. You were saying that on the one hand, Jordan's a scientist. He actually studies the neuroscience of these things. Perhaps it started with his research in alcohol, but he's a researcher. He studies the actual written papers and books he studies the science and learns from the science what are plausible underlying mechanisms that explain the phenomenological world that we live in. And on the other hand, he's a Jungian. Right? Which is, what are the mythological archetypal stories that we speak, and if we recognize that Jung was a neo-Kantian in the sense that Kant said that there are fundamental categories through which we experience the world that we can't not have: space, time, right?
Yeah.
That when we look at the world through these categories, the world shows up a certain way. And by looking at how it shows up, we can actually kind of get a sense for what these categories are.
Yeah.
So Jung studied myth and said, so what are the things in myth, and what are the categories that they say about our unconscious, how we fundamentally sort the world? And Jordan simplifies that down into the big seven.
Yeah.
Right. So first, or you could say there's order.
And this is in his maps of meaning.
This is in his maps of meaning,
right?
And especially in chapter 11 and beyond order, he goes in rule number 11 or 23, depending on how you think about it. He goes into this. He goes into these seven in details, especially in maps of meaning. So you've got order, the known, right, and order can be a foundation. Culture, the wise king, the loving king, who provides a structure in which we live. Like I wake up and we have video conferencing, we have the internet, we have electricity, we have lighting, we have all of this technology, all of this infrastructure just there for us to use. It's the benevolent king. It's order that is useful to us. But then there's this other kind of order we're talking about, which is it's this way and this way only. And if anyone goes beyond this, they are bad. The tyrannical order. So in order, you've got the benevolent king and the tyrannical king, shall we say. And then there's the unknown, which is chaos. And there you've got chaos as possibility. Like, ooh, here's what's possible. What can I see? How do I go beyond the benevolent goddess? And then chaos as danger and monsters. Right? The evil queen, the dragon of chaos, or the dragon, the monster. So we've got the benevolent king and the tyrannical king, and we've got the benevolent goddess and the evil queen. And then we've got us, like we sit in the middle, and we can leverage order and protect from tyranny, and we can reach towards potential and slay the dragons in the unknown, and we're in that middle point. And in that point, we can do one of two things. We can be the hero, and we can aim for the best possible good. We can aim for truth. We can attempt to articulate as the logos this thing, or we can use these things to manipulate and get power, and we become the villain, the adversary, where we use our ability to articulate in order to gain power and destroy rather than to open. Okay, so these six, and then the Ouroboros, the fundamental chaos. So these are the seven major characters of the Jungian von Neumann myth, as simplified by Jordan Peterson. Right. And so this book, the first book, Antidote to Chaos, was more about how do you deal with chaos. Yeah. Like how do you avoid the parts of chaos? And this one is, and how do you not be villainous in reference to chaos?
Yeah.
How do you be heroic in the face of chaos? And this book is more about order. How do you, what are the dangers and the possibilities of order? How do you make sure not to get stuck in it? Don't allow it to tyrannize you, but also don't disrespect it. Such that you're heroic relative to order versus villainous relative to order.
Right.
Yeah. So anyways, because I talked for a while, I'm going to shut up.
And so, Mark, what is it that, how is reading Peterson and his work, how does it springboard into you and your life, and what have you gotten out of it that has you?
Yes.
Yeah. Such that has you. want to do this?
This, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, so coached for a long time. Right? I have this work I called the game of thriving, in which I tried to take all of my work and bring it into a system and make it consistent with Western philosophy, integral, postmodern, modern psychology, success, and psychology, all of it. Tried to put it all together, and so I've been doing that for it's been 12 years that I've been working on that, or 12 years since I put that all together, and then I came across Peterson.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and his work is so deep and poignant and powerful and touched me that I decided that I was going to go through my entire philosophy, right? This, 40 hours of training that I had developed. And I was going to rethink it all in terms of every part of it and integrate it with all of his work. And similarly, and then John Vervaeke came on the scene at the same time and did the Awakening the Meaning Crisis. And I'm okay, and I want to integrate it with that. And so really for the last 2.5 years, as a coach, I work with clients, but I work with like a dozen clients. They're probably similar to you, right? And I do some training, but mostly I work directly one-on-one with clients. And so I wanted to create a course that took Jordan Peterson's work and put it into an entire coaching context. And I call that the game of heroic meaning. And I'm actually in the middle of launching this. You know this. I'm in the middle of launching this course called the Game of Heroic Meaning right now. So for me, Jordan Peterson is a mentor, a center around which someone who is generating beauty that I must contend with, that I'm provoked to take everything that he's doing and use it to reform and deepen myself, such that I want to take every part of myself and put it into his system and then see what happens. And in the process of doing that, I created the Game of Heroic Meaning. And so right, I'm a coach and I'm a trainer who is attempting to take Jordan Peterson's work and put it from a theoretical perspective into a practical thing that I can use with my clients.
Right. How did it touch you? How did he touch you? He said he touched you. Out of that touch, everything that you described.
Yeah. So right now, Jordan is beginning to recover from this horrific physical malady. And he's not better. I mean, he's better than he was, but he's not like back to whole. One of the ways he described it is that every day of his life is worse than the worst day of his life before this thing happened. And he has conversations with people and he breaks down. He cries. He in the face of it all, he's vulnerable to the point of saying, here's where my self-concept has fallen apart in the face of this. Like the amount of pain and suffering that I go through on a daily basis is enough to make me question like who I am. And some parts of it don't change. Some parts of it's like this and it was like this and it is like this and he's completely recognizable. But on the other hand, he's just torn up. He's in such pain. And like you asked me, how does it touch me? Like, one, I love him. I care for him. Who he is in my life is someone who I love and care for. And so his pain is painful to me because I care about his happiness. And I mean, I've never met him. He doesn't know me at all. Doesn't even know I exist, probably. Like, who I am is deeper because of him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And the other way to me is just respect, admiration, and if I look at my life mostly consists of the teachers who I become fascinated. Like I became radically fascinated with NLP, and I spent thousands of hours studying NLP. And then I became fascinated with Nietzsche, and I spent over 1,000 hours with Nietzsche. And I became fascinated with Integral and Ken Wilber, and I spent thousands of hours with Ken Wilber and Ayn Rand and Heidegger and Landmark and then circling your work, right? Just and spending just at least 1,000 hours doing all of those things, often multiple thousands of hours. And that's what my life is. Like what ideas have captured me so thoroughly that they define that who I am is like I became who I am in dialogue with those things. And he is that. He is the latest version of that. Like someone who I find so fascinating that he has literally become a standard against which I strive, a pillar around which I orbit, and a food that I attempt to digest and integrate. And that has been, I mean, it's one of the most beautiful, he's one of the most beautiful mentors I've ever had the chance to, and he's the first YouTube mentor I have like this. All of my other mentors come from books, you know, most of them are dead.
Yeah.
Like most of them are like 16th century or Aristotle or Aquinas or Hume and.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. Let me ask you the same questions. Like, who has he been for you? Who have you become with him? How does he fit in your work, in your life?
Let's see. I think it's interesting. It's more, I would say for me, it's what he opened up in the world, right? It's the conversation he opened up, right? That ended up being the deepest influences for me. Some of the stuff that he just talks about, right? I know that my wife has always been, she'll go with me on my rides. Right. She'll go with me on all my trips, but it's not like that she's necessarily would do that without me. However, with Peterson, I remember I showed her the conversation with John Vervaeke and Peterson that's like from a number of years ago. I think it's the Mind and Meaning series or something like that. It's what it's called. It's like the one from 4, 5, 6 years ago.
Where John introduces relevance realization. Yeah,
totally. And it really caught, like what he said, really caught her. And she started listening to it out, like independent of me. And right. Yes. Actually, no, she is the meaning of music caught her. Right. Do you remember that one? That one's, I think that's still one of my favorites that he's done. And he's such a good lecturer, right? Where he talks about music. Oh, if you haven't seen where he talks about music as is basically synonymous with the way that we experience meaning, right? It opens that whole thing up. So in that conversation, right, and her watching him, she started to kind of, in some sense, I would imagine it started to speak to her about being a mother, right? Like, what is it with her life and the meaning of her life and being a mother? And those were all things that we were not going to do, right? We were not talking about it. Like, it just wasn't on our radar. And that put that on our radar. Now we are now 4 months pregnant. So, so in some sense, right?
He's Peterson is an
Yeah.
unofficial godfather.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, so in that sense, it's just, in a big way that obviously, like, it's the whole person maybe is coming out of this. And I'm sure I'm not alone with that one, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know I'm not alone with that one, right? And I think one of the things I would imagine he shows people, right, in some way is this kind of sense in which, where tradition actually matters, right? There's like a sense of history and tradition and, like the validity of religion and the way he talks about Christianity and all those kinds of things. He puts it in a way that, like, I think the modern mind can really, really get, and it speaks to a lot of people, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and I think it also kind of exposes a lot of what I would call, for me, just a sense of kind of pre-given, unthematic, unthought about kind of, liberal, like a liberal questioning of all authority that I just automatically had. I just grew up in. I didn't even know I had it.
Mm-hmm.
Just this automatic, like, questioning of like things like, like, of course I wouldn't go to church. Like, no one goes to church. Like, all these things that I didn't even think about. That in some sense he pointed to the where it comes from and the possible validity of all that, and made it an encounter, right? And I think that's kind of what happened there with Brienne. It's this just like waking us up to that question, that, like, moved things forward, right? Now that we're having a kid, so that way, I think
Mm-hmm.
that I have always. There's a way I love it when he lectures, because he's always at the edge of what he's trying to figure out, and there's something about, people that have done that are like that and do that for me, that there's this one way where you're paying attention to what they're saying, but there's this whole other kind of demonstration of what they're doing in saying what they're saying in their lectures. And I think it's just that edge of, like, right at the edge of the known and the unknown, right? And, like, encountering, trying to figure something out, but, like, genuinely asking the question, right? That encounter, I've just been attracted to that as long as I can remember, right? Like when you talked about the fascination, that
Mm-hmm.
kind of encounter where you're just, the more you lean into it, the more it yields, like, and challenges you and yields, like, to you or for you, and then it kind of, you end up becoming more someone yourself through it, and that feedback loop, right? And so in some ways, he demonstrates that way of doing things that
Mm-hmm.
I've always really appreciated. Um, and then there was that, like, just the world of, I think in some sense, him, when he became famous, it just opened up a whole connections of conversations that started, that I ended up becoming a part of.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And out of that, I met John Vervaeke, and we became, like, we started doing, like, creating kind of some new stuff for ourselves with Dialogos and ongoing conversations. And mostly the last couple of years, that's mostly where my attention has been, right, is kind of talking live with, Jordan Hall and all of those kind of, like, intellectual dark web kind of conversation. And so I've been part of that, and been just growing a lot from that, right? And that's been awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So so it's all of that is very, very connected to Peterson for me.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
So you and I haven't spoken about this. How has Peterson's work impacted
Mm-hmm.
circling, how you teach circling, how you understand circling, the Circling Institute, right? Because, I mean, you train, like, you
Mm-hmm.
created this now
Mm-hmm.
worldwide phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, how does it relate to that?
God. It's always difficult for me to answer questions like that. Like, you could also ask me about that with my grapplings with Heidegger, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, because in some sense, I think the way that I think, or the way that I do things, is I would say listening to him, like listening to Heidegger, listening to John, all the things that have fascinated me, right? And I've encountered. In some sense, I feel like it tutors my attention, right? And so in that tutoring of the attention has me pay attention to my students and what I notice and what I track,
Mm-hmm.
like through it, right? Through
Mm-hmm.
it. And a lot of times I don't understand that until way after the fact. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, I can see how all that kind of comes together. But I would say, so I actually don't, I'm not very aware of any particular thing that Peterson has said or I've learned from him that I've like changed something in circling or
Mm-hmm.
in some way. I would say that like it's all part of a greater movement of being able to understand what I'm looking at, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like in the phenomenological sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, that's what I would say in
Yeah.
terms of circling.
So
Yeah.
it's interesting. So it impacts you
Hmm.
as you dance with it, as you
Hmm.
grip and
Hmm.
grapple with it,
Yeah.
and as you
Yeah.
like you lift weights, right? It's like as you
Hmm.
work with the ideas, it represents and it shapes you, and then that shows up however it shows up, rather than
Hmm.
you could say one of the things that's always fun between the two of us is like, I'm as a philosopher, I'm always interested. Okay, so how does this idea fit with this idea? And then how
Yeah.
do I
Yeah.
articulate that? And then how do I find a way of explaining it that captures it, that where you don't have to learn
Hmm.
all of the stuff, like how,
Hmm.
yes, yes,
Hmm.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that
Hmm.
context,
Oh, actually, well, this is
no,
also,
please.
I would say too, I would say just in terms of like him talking about aim, right? And hierarchy of values, right? And that just that sense where he talks about, like, that's just the way he talks about it, right? And talks about like we're always aiming at something. It's not like that was super new, but there was a clarity he brought to it that I think, I mean, definitely with my clients in terms of just, well, two things. It's like notice it because this is all always that's always the thing with me. It's like I'm constantly like reading philosophy and doing all this stuff, so I don't exactly know where it all comes from, right? But
Mm-hmm.
there's a sense of just where I think when Peterson talks about the phenomenological aspect of that we see things, right? Already, always, in some sense, in terms of order and chaos, like that's kind of a way that phenomenologically things show up for us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I would say just whatever that sense is in terms of understanding when somebody's talking and when they're like when clients are talking or when I'm just talking to anybody, like really listening, like kind of getting what am I actually listening to when I'm listening to them, right? There's a sense in which, well, on one level, that they're even paying attention somewhere, whether or not they're talking about the thing that they're paying attention to, I can begin to hear that, right? And as you start to begin to hear that, you can start to get like, oh, what is the even just the act of their speaking already always a response to and an address of. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's like you can even hear that in their voice, in their posture, like so, and in what they're saying. And then in the response and sounding out what you hear, right? And sounding that back out, you can start to maybe have conversations that point more directly, like say to the telos, right? The goal that they maybe wasn't even aware that they were in somehow related to, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
you can ask questions about it. So that in some sense, it's helped me really hear more of where people are coming from and what they're actually sharing that's beyond what they know to share. You can start to hear that. Yeah. So I would say that's a big, that ongoing kind of phenomenological perspective has been huge for me in my life. Yeah. And working with people and circling, and in some sense, that's what circling is, in my view. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a context in which people show up as the person they show up, pursuing the goals that they're pursuing, and understanding the world in the way that they understand it.
Yep. And that context works by being backgrounded, right? Or in some sense withdrawals, right? So in some sense, what's most determined is also what's most hidden oftentimes, right? So in that, just that kind of, that's what I mean, is that understanding or that way of listening, this really comes out in my listening, and like actually hearing what people are, what their being is saying, and start to hear that which is most withdrawn, right? In some way starts to come into emergence, and then John Vervaeke and I and Chris, and like hopefully we'll have them here to have this conversation with some of these chapters as we go on, right? Have kind of like started looking at that very phenomena, but in a philosophical dialogue, right? And that we've been calling that dialogos. So that's also come out of kind of downstream,
and in a cognitive science research perspective, we're actually looking at okay, so what have the theorists in this field said, and what are the dialogues going on, and what have we measured, and what are the models that we're As you were saying that, I was thinking, like, what's an analog for me around that? And I think in terms of stories and games, in terms of what is the context, like who are you as a character in the story? I'm playing with my 13-and-a-half-month-old grandson this morning, and the character that I am when I'm with him, and the agent that I am, and the arena that I am in, like what do I think is happening? What's the world I think is happening? When I'm with him, I notice different things about the world than when I'm talking to you, or when I'm like working out, or when I'm cleaning, and like, where do I want to go? The adventure, it's different based on that. So I like to think of it as like I have a story where I'm an agent in an arena on an adventure with my grandson, and who I am, the choices I make, the words I speak, the way I speak, the goals that I pursue fit within that story, that understanding. But when I'm with you, and as I'm it's time to have the call with Guy about Peterson, right? It's like, oh, okay, so now that's a different story. I'm a different agent. I'm focused on a different arena, on a different kind of adventure. And so I call those stories, and the stories shape, they're this background context. And if you choose to consciously and intentionally create a certain kind of story, I call that choice a game. Right? Where you say, I'm going to consciously, intentionally tell this kind of story, pursue this kind of goal as a chosen thing that I do. Like, I'm choosing this. It's not that it's the right thing to do. It's not that it's the appropriate thing. No, it's the thing I'm choosing to do because I think it's cool. It's a game. So this conscious... So I tend to think of it in terms of stories and games. Around Peterson, this phenomenological piece. Right? It has, I agree, it has shifted what I notice about the stories, what I notice about the games, into this mythical context of order and tyranny, of potential and monsters, of heroism and villainy, of the chaotic, unformed infinite, inexhaustible potential of the space in which all of that happens.
Right.
That shifts how I understand stories, like which parts I pay attention to when someone's speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm much more interested in how are they being the hero or the villain in their own story? Like, what is that? What is the underlying, unspoken, withdrawn background
Mm-hmm.
context?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the idea of heroism has just become so central. Like,
Right.
what does it
Right.
mean to be a hero? What does it mean to stand in the space of hero with a relationship
Mm-hmm.
to order where you recognize its value and what it adds in terms of best practices and infrastructure versus the limitations that it can
Mm-hmm.
bring into place if you take it too seriously. If you say, well, that's the way that it is, and that's the only way that it is, and anyone who doesn't see it this way is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And like being in that
Mm-hmm.
heroic stance towards the future, to look for potential, but also to be willing to face monsters.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
to make sure in that process that I'm not slipping into villainy, that I'm
Mm-hmm.
not using my ability to articulate, to manipulate the world into how I think it should be, rather than to dance
Mm-hmm.
in the unfolding and blossoming of how it might open into beauty. Karsa's infinite game. Like, how do I play
Mm-hmm.
in such a way that it leads to more play for more people? This
Mm-hmm.
heroic stance, like that,
Mm-hmm.
that embodied phenomenological, what is
Mm-hmm.
it like to be me in this story? What is the story that I'm in? Not in terms of the technical, but in terms of the phenomenological.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's had a
Yeah.
profound impact on me.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And then start to be able to, the in a circling context, right? Which is where the you could say the game is like profoundly being with what is, right? So
Mm-hmm.
right there's the intent highlight something, right? One is that is right, is has a distinction in such that it can be hidden, it can be revealed, right? It can be more profoundly be in relationship with, right? And it's interesting in the context of relationships. One of the things that people find out is like the moment you just go, okay, look, we're not going to solve any problems. In fact, our intention, our agenda is to be agendaless, right? Which is another kind of agenda, but it's a thing where all of a sudden people start to realize like, oh my God, the only thing I've ever done was solve problems. The moment someone speaks, right, I'm
Mm-hmm.
fixing them or solving it, and it highlights the habituation in a particular mode, right? And so there's something about, I've noticed in that just having that is the intention, that you start to, all of a sudden it starts the phenomena of what's already there, the telos that's within the person, right? That they're not even necessarily aware of, starts to, like, in some sense, unfold from the ground up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you could say unpacking those stories, you could start to hear them, right? You can start to hear like, oh, something's opened up and they're pointing in this direction when they're talking about feeling better all of a sudden, and something's opened up and they point in this direction, they point in this direction, and you start to notice those differences. And you could say that agent arena adventure kind of unconceals from within the experience, right? And
Mm-hmm.
there's something about that. I think that there's something always for me about that sense of from the bottom up, like in the phenomena, in the experience, that is so affirming, right, about life or something, or about being. It's like there's something, and it seems like it is for a lot of people, right? Just that
Mm-hmm.
sense in which, oh yeah, without me even being conscious of it, right? Like I've on some level have been in responding to what I most love, right? And even my distortions and all those kinds of things have been reveals this fact that I just care, right? it can be hidden from me or never seen, and then we can kind of see it, and then it's revealed, and in seeing it, there's something that seems to be transformative, right, of the whole relationship to being. And so that's one of the things in circling specifically, where that, I think, that's why I say I think that's what we do when we're in relationship, is we become in some sense phenomenologists, like listening to what shines forth, right? That we're always on an adventure. Like, to be a human being is always to have an aim, right? It's always to be in kind of some kind of narration of a story, right? And that you don't even have to be conscious of it. But there's something about kind of like listening and having it be revealed in some sense, like from underneath, right? And I think that's kind of what in some sense Jung does that, right? With the whole psyche, with myth, right? Is kind of watching, if you like look at his books, he's like looking at symbols that have like gone through time, that have emerged at different times. And in some sense, there's this kind of listening to being, or the psyche, or whatever it is you want to call it, and like kind of watching something emerge like the intelligibility of being, if you will. Yeah.
And
so
this,
I think
this
Peterson's got that kind of listening. Yeah.
the ground up from experience itself.
Yeah.
You know, when you were describing in circling, there's a profound being with what is. It's a welcoming to discover what is, for the unspoken to kind of recognize itself and be spoken. And to share, here's what I'm experiencing, not in order to impact you. I'm not saying this so that you will feel something. I'm saying this so that you can experience how I'm experiencing you. And in the process, you get to experience yourself anew. And if I'm present to you, and I'm honest and feeling into me, then what I share with you opens up for you, and it unconceals the thing that's happening, that was happening, has been happening, often is like the theme or a theme in my life that happens all the time, which is withdrawn, concealed, fish to water. Like, it's not there, and then all of a sudden it becomes there. I was, as you were describing this, I'm thinking beyond order. Like, there is an order which is in place. There's a set of heuristics that I'm using, habits that I'm doing, stories that I tell so often I don't even realize that I'm within that story. It's just the context from which I tell stories. And it's order. Like, that story is a way of interpreting the inexhaustible Ouroboros of being, of existence. You know, I say that there's existence, and then we interpret it, and then we live in our interpretations. Like, there's existence, and we tell stories, and then we live in the stories. And that telling stories is this deep psychological set of contexts, and they're order. They are the order in which we live.
Right.
And when we can use these techniques, or the circling, to cause that to come into consciousness.
And that very coming into consciousness is also bringing in this other thing called it was unconscious, right? That in some sense, that probably like starts to reach into just a little bit of novelty, that where it's like, what was background is foreground, right? That little moment seems to be so rich, right? Like there are little moments, I guess, where you could say it's be something like the novelty came in, like the hiddenness shined through. And then when it's just, but when it's from something that's on some level so very familiar, there's something about that just seems to be so personally impactful, And I think the way that he's talking about in Beyond Order, right? That kind of trans order, I would say, like it's a novelty that opens up. It opens up the structure, those stories that have been hidden, and then it opens it up, and it draws something in, right? That then refreshes the ground, if you will, right? It recalibrates it, it renews it, right? Where maybe when it was unconscious, it could have been tyrannical, right? It could have been like assumed, hidden, like old, in that kind of, in the ways to talking about the tyrannical sense. Yeah.
And also just partial and isolated.
Yeah.
When I'm
Yes.
when I'm working with clients, when I'm navigating my own consciousness, it's so often the case that the unconscious story, the removed, withdrawn story that serves as the background context that's always already present that I'm not aware of.
Yeah.
That when I can notice it and draw attention to it and begin to playfully construct potential languages in which it can reveal itself. Maybe let's try, what if we described it like this? What does that bring? Oh, well, let's refine it like, and we create a language. We create an understanding, a story to, in the process of bringing that into existence. Right? You said, like, it's so recognizable. I know that. That goes on all the time, but I hadn't thought of it that way. I hadn't parsed my experience in that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And often what I find is that particular character, that story, that set of goals and that set of understandings and the dynamics that it brings with it, that thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is partial. It's disconnected. It's like one of the metaphors I like to say is like, it was created when I was 7. Like when I was 7, I had an experience and I made sense of it like that. And some part of my consciousness went, okay, I'll keep my eye on that.
Right.
I'll keep my eye on that. And it's built and it's not that it's wrong. It's that it's isolated and disconnected from my overall story. And so it acts in ways that it's kind of like an ideology. It says, this is what's important, and that's the only thing that's important. And so when it acts without regard for the rest of the context. And so it shows up as often problematic.
Yeah.
But when we can bring it, we can allow it to fit into and join the conversation and understand it's the part it has to play and that it's not the only part.
Yeah. 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 I would say, wouldn't you say it's like it becomes the only part in its concealment, right? In its concealment is given order, right? That there's something about, because I've noticed it's usually this moment of, there's a moment where it goes from, oh, I had no idea. I was like turning my whole life into that one moment when I was 7. And then like fixing it, thereby turning it into that, thereby needing to fix it, right? Those things. There's something about that recognition that it's not like I do another move, right? Where it's something, it all seems to happen at once. Like, boom, in that moment, the seeing it is the new order, or the seeing it is the new, right? That, because I think you also not just see that, but you see that you hadn't seen it, right? And so you actually see the domain of the domain of I guess you also see that there is such a domain as experientially as you could call it the unknown known, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have unknown knowns that run things, and they're concealed in their proximity. So I think what it is it opens you up to something that's really near, right? That in
Mm-hmm.
itself, in seeing that, there's so much that goes on that it's no longer in the background, it's in the foreground, and then you can relate to it and bring consciousness into it, and it becomes more integrated, and you can see its partialness, and you can recognize it. But there's something about that. What it's revealing, it reveals something about the structure of our being, right? That seems to be just, at least it shines to me as awesome.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So, you introduced me to circling, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know, 18 years ago, something, whatever it is now.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing how when people have the experience through circling of encountering, naming, surfacing this proximate thing, it's right there, but it's so close that you don't see it. And then you see it, and you see that you weren't seeing it, and you see the consequences of that, and you see the opening of that, and you're doing that in relationship with
Yeah.
others.
Yeah.
That you could say that that ultimately vulnerable experience
Mm-hmm.
of actually discovering yourself and
Yeah.
discovering your blindness,
Mm-hmm.
discovering the
Mm-hmm.
thing to which you were blind, and having it be here, and then having it be in a context where people are looking at us going, oh, that makes me feel like this, that makes me like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
they're with me on the ride. I'm having this most vulnerable experience, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
being accepted. I'm being understood and accepted.
Mm-hmm.
This,
Yeah.
like, people want that. It's like,
Yeah.
it's like, I
Totally.
want that again. How do I come back to this? I want to do this course again. I want to be part of
Right.
that
Totally.
circle. I want to do it again. Whatever that is, I want more of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's awesome. It's
Yeah.
awesome like that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Like coaching versus training.
Mm-hmm.
Coaching versus training.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things, like,
Mm-hmm.
I love training. I love sharing ideas and saying, here's an idea,
Yeah.
apply it.
Right.
Here's an
Right.
idea, use it. Here's a tool,
Yeah.
use it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the challenge is that that's an outside frame that you're
Mm-hmm.
giving someone. They then have to connect
Yeah.
that to their lives.
All the dots.
They
Yes.
need to make that, like, how does that fit for me? How does that connect to me such that
Yeah.
when I take the idea and I try it on, I notice the thing about myself such that I have that this working from the bottom up.
Mm-hmm.
Like in coaching, it's like, well, so what do
Mm-hmm.
you want? What's going on
Mm-hmm.
for you? How
Right.
are you experiencing? Let's work from where you are and build
Exactly.
from that, rather than working
Yeah.
from where you could be and orienting
Mm-hmm.
yourself towards that.
Right.
Jordan Peterson says
Well,
to start local.
it's the paradox.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
paradox
Please.
about this is that where you could be, like, that's the thing that gets one of the things that gets realized is, like, we're always in relationship to where we could be,
Mhm.
right? Like, if we're oriented, that's always in view on some level. And that's the thing that's been kind of, like, I think Peterson has been really good at unpacking that structure, right?
Mhm.
So it's kind of like there's that sense of, like, even in when they're training and they're not talking, like, oh wait, that whatever that sense of who you could be is always seems to be what is somehow part of the ground or part of the orientation.
Mhm.
And then with coaching, I would say that, like, yeah, it's like with coaching, you're much more in the context of their life, right? Of, like, what's coming and, like, what are their goals, and like where are they headed, and articulating all of that. And then every conversation on some level is in some sense bringing that explicit and seeing where you are in relationship to that, right? And all the things that come up. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so to build on what you're saying, so your aim determines what you see. Like the goal, you're always in pursuit of a goal. And it's that goal that orients you, that has you notice. The example I like to use is like, look around the room, notice what you notice, and then imagine you're an architect and look at the same room, notice what you notice. Imagine you're an interior decorator, right? Imagine you're an anthropologist. Each, like, as an architect, I'm looking for how is the building designed, so I see that which is appropriate to that. Or interior decorating, like, what's the style? I see different things. So the goal is always there, and the goal determines, your aim determines what you see. Again, so like the adventure that you're on, the goal, like your character, who you are, is always already in relation to a goal. And what you notice in the arena is always already in relation to the goal. Now, let's say that I read a Tony Robbins book, or I read some book, Tim Ferriss's Tools for Titans, or whatever it is, right?
Right.
It's like they say, well, what do you think about this goal? Like, they provide a goal. And then they say, well, so if you, like, how do you relate to that? Coaching, circling. When you start from the goal that you're already pursuing, that is always already in place, when you learn to articulate, learn to understand and refine the goal that you are already, then you build this bottom-up situation. And so all the work on that goal is automatically connected to you, versus if you're pursuing someone else's goal.
Yeah.
If someone says, here's a goal, then you have to build your connection to it. And how well you do that. Can you make that goal your goal? And then what does it do for your agency? What does it do for your arena? Jordan, I was thinking about this, as you were speaking. Jordan says again and again, what is it in your life that is right there that needs to be done? Like, what is the challenge in your life right now? Start there. Start local. Clean your own room. Right? Make it as beautiful as possible. Start with you. Start with your life. Don't start with, how do we change the world? Like, how should society be organized?
Yes.
Well, like, how does that relate to you and the goal that you are? You're not going to get this kind of bottom-up discovery through that unless you do like particular kind of thing, and that's like ripe for ideology. Whereas when you say, what's there for me? What are the goals? Let me identify the goals that give me the story that's right there, that's so proximate I don't even see it. It impacts everything, but I'm not aware of it. How do I bring that into consciousness? How do I use my goals in order that bottom up? I was just thinking about clean your room and work on what's there for you to do. Aim low so you can aim high. First, aim low, aim local.
Yeah.
Right. It's one of the themes in Beyond Orders and in all of Jordan's work. It's like, what is beyond order for you? Your order.
Yeah. What is it? It is also like, what is it that, he also, another way he's affected me actually is in some way, of like learn like how to the sense in which your room or your place will talk to you. And then all you got
Mm-hmm.
to do is just look at, he talked about like a phenomenological way of cleaning your house. Just
Uh-huh.
look at a corner and then just feel, right? Just feel the place where you suffer and then go over there and move stuff around and sit down and then feel it, right? And then feel it
Mm-hmm.
and then
Mm-hmm.
feel it and then feel it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd say it's like that. It's in that same kind of ballpark of that. No, it's like, I think what he's talking about is that no, if you just start where you are and you just listen to what's already uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to find all kinds of stuff that one has been speaking to you for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
and you've been non-hearing it, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And then just turning and addressing those. Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's all right in there.
Yeah. Yeah. And looking around, it might be that there's something in place that is off. Like you
Hmm.
look at it and it shouldn't be that way.
Yeah.
It should be like this. According to whom?
Hmm.
According to me and my aesthetic,
Yeah.
what I feel it. Again, this phenomenological experience of am I opening? Again, the language
Hmm.
I learned from you. Am I opening or am I closing?
Hmm. Hmm.
Like when I look at that thing, do I open
Open.
or do I
Hmm.
close? And part of it is,
Yeah.
okay, I look at it and I say, I close.
Hmm.
How do
Yeah.
I arrange it? And then do I open more? Not am I completely open?
Yeah.
Am I 100%
Yeah.
done? No, but just is it
Yeah.
more? Okay, if it's more, let's do more of that. Okay?
Yeah.
It's a
Exactly.
win.
Hmm.
Every step in that direction is
Yeah.
a win.
Yeah.
Another thing I notice is that I'll look at a corner of my room. Literally,
Hmm.
that's a corner of my room. And I look at it, and it's not that there's something about it that has me close,
Hmm.
is that
Hmm.
there's a potential opening. Like, I
Yeah.
could do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And it calls
Yeah.
me forth. But either
It
of those
calls me.
are in this experience.
Hmm.
He says, when you speak,
Hmm. Yeah.
notice
That thing
when
about
you're
speaking.
done
Yeah.
speaking, are you
Hmm.
open or are you closed? Right?
Right.
Do you
Right.
feel
Right.
stronger, more
Yeah.
alive, aligned with existence? Do you
Right.
like have greater permission to exist?
Hmm.
Or are you closed? You have
Hmm.
less permission to exist. Like
Yeah.
this phenomenological testing.
Hmm. Yeah.
Right? It doesn't
Yes.
matter what what the guru says or what the professor says or what the activist says or what the family member says. Like, okay, that's all
Hmm.
interesting.
Yeah.
And it's useful
But does it
because
call? Does it close? Does it open? Call,
yes,
close, open. Yeah.
yes.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's the key.
Yeah.
Like listen to that.
Yeah.
The idea of Chesterton fences, you may remember, was like you inherit a piece of property and there's a fence in the middle of a field.
Hmm.
And you're like, I don't want this
Hmm.
fence here.
Right.
Right? On the one hand, you just say, okay, well, so get rid of the fence. It's your property now.
Hmm. Hmm.
But Chesterton said, hey, someone put that fence there for a reason.
Hmm.
If you remove that fence, what might happen? Like, you
Right.
don't know why that fence is there. What we know is that someone went through the effort to do that and maintain it. So when you
Yeah.
inherit your
Yeah.
culture, when you inherit your life,
Yeah.
when you
Hmm.
inherit your background stories,
Hmm. Yep.
like treat them with respect. Be
Hmm.
curious
Yes.
about them and the values that they serve.
Hmm.
Right? In terms of
Hmm.
going
Yeah.
beyond order, it doesn't mean against order. We want to leverage as
Hmm.
much of the order as possible, but we also want to be able to question it. But we don't want to dismiss it out of hand.
Hmm. Right.
There's the phrase that today's insight is tomorrow's dogma.
Hmm.
right? And I call this life in carcass. I'll have an insight like, oh my gosh, oh, I see the story that I've been telling. I've been living as if I need to solve this problem. And so all of my behavior has just unconsciously been down this particular channel. And I see it. Oh, and now I've opened up a new set of possibilities. I don't exactly know what I'm going to do yet. It's not that I've then turned that into a goal and turned that into a project, but there's this opening, there's this life. But then I can go, okay, so here's the rule. The rule is, in this situation, instead of doing this, I now do this. And now I've got another rule. I've got another story that just kind of dominates me, and I end up with dogma.
Right.
This heroic stance where you're honoring order and reaching into chaos, where you're building on the known, but questioning and refining the known and looking into the unknown for potential and danger. For me, that comes down to my calendar every day. Right? Like one of the first quotes I ever came up with is that morality is doing what someone else told you to do. Even if that someone else was once you. Right? That like, I create the self that I think I am, the projects that I'm engaged in. And for me, it really comes down to, I'm planning out my week. I've got X amount of hours that I can choose to invest. A lot of those hours are going to be invested without my choice. Like, I'm going to sleep a certain amount. I'm going to eat a certain amount. I'm going to take care of my grandkids. I'm going to spend time with my wife. I've got my work. It's like, that's done. I've got a certain, just a few hours that I can literally choose to do with as I see fit according to my goals. And here I am. It's like, on the one hand, I decided last week, last month, last year, that I wanted to accomplish X goal. And that means I'm going to be spending 5 hours a week.
Right.
That's the order that I'm inheriting. Do I question that? Do I every day question, okay, it's 3:00. I've said I'm going to be doing this project for 2 hours. Well, do I really want to do that? Like, how, like, I can't go too far into chaos, but I have to be willing to question, like, am I getting what I want? Am I approaching it the way that I want? This, because it comes down to the phenomenological, like, right now I have to choose on what will I focus my attention? Or will I? Right? Am I going to focus my attention on a goal that I have chosen, in which I'm on an adventure as an agent in an arena, shaping that? I've already created that story. I've already got that goal. I've already made that plan. So now I enact that, hopefully with consciousness. Do I do that? Because I've got like 100 other things calling my attention, which might be more fun. Certainly, like, there's a lot less discipline involved with them, and that just makes it more fun by, like, it's 3:00, I'm supposed to do X. Anything is better than what I'm supposed to do, right? I'm a rebel. Like, how do you be heroic? And how do you go beyond order without going against order? Yeah, that's another way that Jordan has impacted me. It's like to question my own goals. Not like to rebel against them automatically. And not like to obey them automatically. But to trust that the self that created those goals had a clue.
Totally.
That to the degree that those goals were created in a state of insight and vision and beauty and power and confidence. Right. And to the degrees that, you know what? Over the last 10 years, I've wanted that goal over and over and over and over and over. Like, totally. Okay, I'm gonna honor that even as I look for the anyway, it's
Yeah.
beyond
Yeah.
order. It's not against order. I'm
Yeah.
saying this to
Yeah.
myself. It's not against
Yeah.
order,
Yeah.
but it's
Yeah.
not order alone.
Less. Yes.
It's how do I take the order and then add more to it, bring more consciousness, more unsurface, unconceal, excavate more of the background underneath that, and somehow articulate it without having it become dogma.
Yeah.
That. That's what this thing is for me.
Right. It seems, I think basically what I heard there is, how do I know? This seems to be, if I could know the answer to that one question, it'd be this: where do I put my attention? Everything comes out of that, right? And I think that's the big question. I suppose there's so many different ways to do it, but there's a sense where I think that in doing these things, right, and continually like kind of being in the center of the order and the chaos, as he talks about heroically, as you were just talking about, that in doing that the act of doing that, and this is what kind of I think John talks about with sovereignty too, is like, or maybe Jordan was talking about this, that the act of being sovereign, right? Every act of, you know that you're being sovereign because the act, when you act from the sovereignty, it informs you about how to become even more sovereign, right? That process. So I was just thinking about that sense in which this asymptotic, as you like to talk about, is like it's closer and closer and closer to where on some level it's like maybe I have to just like mark it all out on my calendar and like have meetings about it and get really clear and then do that consciously. And then as I do that more, it kind of somehow gets more in your body somehow. And your instinct is just to know where the sweet spot is, right? Such that like you look at your calendar and you can know like, oh, that's the one I go. And then I look at like that sense in which your calendar and your phenomenology thing kind of sync up hand in hand, I would imagine, is the possibility. Seems living.
It's like, okay, that's a good, that's a great way to describe coaching.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right. The lived experience of what is it that you actually care about.
Yep.
Let's systematically look through the various areas of your life, or if you're an entrepreneur in your business, let's look through the various aspects of your business.
Yep.
What is it that you actually want in each of those areas? Not what you should want, right? Although that's useful to look at, but like, what do you actually want, that thing? And then let's translate that into a set of goals that you can put in your calendar, a set of priorities such that you're giving the optimal or the appropriate amount of time and energy to each of those pieces across the course of a week. And then how do you deal with all of the distractions, all of the additional priorities that suddenly get thrust in, all of the changes in the environment that happen, that demand of you that you reconfigure the plan because the world that you built it for isn't there anymore. Right? Like Jordan says in the preface, what's it called? Anyway, the
prologue or something.
The introduction, the prologue. There's a particular word. It's a musical term to speak to what you're saying. He says that when you find order, like you go into the room and at first you don't understand the room. You know, Ken Wilber talks about transformation and translation, that when you're transforming up levels of self-development, it's like you're moving up in a building to a new floor in the building. When you transform, let's say up the spiral dynamic spiral, or you transform up, and then you're in this floor and all of the furniture is catawampus. It's like crazy. And you have to like organize it, and you have to learn to navigate it, and that takes time, and you're just translating, you're like making sense of this world, you're making sense of it, and you're taking the chaos and you're turning it into order. And you're making it order until it's so comfortable and you're so fluid with it that you start going, oh, what's beyond this? I've exhausted this. It's time to go up to the next thing. You start reaching into chaos. Like, what's the next monster to face now that I've got this skill, this the best order that you can come up with. Like, I got this. Hold my beer. That's like order. Order is hold my beer. Like, I got this. I feel confident that this is, I've got a plan. I enact the plan and it actually happens. The challenge is that the world moves, right? You can build the best plan for right here, right now, but the world moves, and the world is moving faster than it's ever moved.
Yes.
Right? There's this Clubhouse thing. Like, Clubhouse is just becoming hot. It's like, what's Clubhouse? I don't know what Clubhouse is. What I know is that a lot of the people that I like and respect are going, Clubhouse? Wait a minute. I don't have time to learn a new technology. But I need to choosing
that thing.
Goals that actually move you forward while being open to the next thing. This is the phenomenological heroism.
Yeah.
That's what this is about, I think. Yeah, that's what it is. I mean, that's what catches me. That's what catches me about this.
Yeah.
It's like Peterson constantly puts me back into that place. Now sometimes he talks about sociology and politics and wokeism and all that stuff, and that's fascinating as well. But what I hear him saying over and over and over again is, go after your goals. Like, all of those goals, all of those stories, all of those things, it's not appropriate. Especially if you're going to be self-righteous pricks about it. Right? If you're going to say, okay, we're going to look at this issue, right? Again, with the pen. Right? It's a cylinder, it's orange, it's plastic, it's under a pound. Like, each one of these dimensions is legitimate. It's like, no, if we're not talking about orange, like, this is all about orange. And if you're not talking about orange, if you talk about the fact that it's a cylinder, or you talk about the fact that it's plastic or under a pound, you are an orangist. Right? That kind of asshole-ish behavior where I get to determine what this conversation is about and how we can talk about these things. And if you don't talk about it the way I want you to talk about it, then, like, that's not it. That is not beyond order, the position of the hero, dealing with what's there for you to deal with respect and caring and courage. Like, it's not. And so he's like, no, this is the phenomenological story that's at the heart of religion. That's at the heart. Thank you. Yes. Remind me of that, because I can get caught up in that. I'm a philosopher. Those kinds of ideas are fascinating to me. Yes. Let's argue that. Right. Yes. It's like, really?
Right. Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's one thing to argue respectfully, civilly, and to actually, I think this. What do you think? You're focused on the cylinder. I'm focused on the color. Isn't that interesting? What can I learn about the color? What can you learn about the cylinder? How can together we like that conversation? I love those conversations, but this conversation of like, there's only one right way to talk about this. It just, it's not where the action is. It's not where the action is. And I used to care so much about the arguments. I used to take so much delight in having the philosophical, logical, rational argument. And it's not that I don't. I still think that's incredibly fun and useful. But it's not where the action is. That's not, if you where do you put your attention? Do you put your attention there, or do you put your attention on what are your goals? How do you make it? It wouldn't
be a problem if we could, if it wouldn't be a problem is if we could only put our attention on things that are in some sense in our reach. Used to be that way, but now we have like dopamine on tap all the time. We've never been in this kind of weird thing that we're in. I don't even think we come close to understanding it. But I think that's kind of, yeah.
Did you see the "I'm not a cat" meme?
No.
Okay, so it's like a month ago. This older gentleman, probably not the most technically sophisticated, has to go to court online. Right? There's a court meeting, but it's online. And so he's getting into the meeting, and somehow he hits a setting and he shows up as a cat. Right? So there's the icon of the cat, and when he speaks, the cat's mouth moves, and he's like this, right? And he's like, I'm trying to figure it out. He says, I'm not a cat. Now the thing about that is it's just a silly little thing, a little byproduct of this technological, it's just this random little thing. But no, it's not just a random little thing, because we have Twitter and we have Facebook and we have YouTube and we have Instagram, and now this guy is world famous. He's the "I'm not a cat" guy. Like, we never had to deal with this before.
Yes. Right.
Totally. Yeah, and we're constantly confronted with this.
Yeah.
So what you aim at determines what you see.
Yeah.
What you aim at determines what you see. And if you're aiming at the things that actually make your life better.
Right.
Your life, like the life of the people that you care about.
Like your relationships with your family, your room, those things that you're actually, they're given to your attention, and you can respond to them, right? In a way that actually directly can make a difference. Like those things.
Yes. Like the things that you can.
This is the first time. This is what's strange. I've never quite thought about it in these terms, but like this, it does seem like we're in a time in history where that line isn't obvious what that is, right? Because now we can be concerned with so many different things and so many different people and issues and like all of that. And that's where we get all the dopamine, like instant dopamine from. So just kind of marking out your phenomenological realm of sight.
Yes.
and taking on responsibility for those and tending to those, the relationships and stuff like that. I think it's like, I think what you're talking about in this, beyond what you're kind of getting in this conversation, is like, I think is in some sense speaks directly to that, but it's in some sense the appropriate way to respond. Like, what do we focus on such that we know what's important, right? To us at the right level, right?
Yeah.
That's it. That's the conversation.
Yeah. And again, it's, on the one hand, I spend an hour doing this thing. Right. And I've got 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So, it's just 1 hour out of all of, but no. Most of those hours are already spoken for. Yeah. Right. Like those are gone. The question is, this week, which ones do you actually get to choose? And you just spent an hour out of that 10, 20, 30. What is that number for you? Is it 3? Because you've got so many commitments and so much responsibility. It's like, what are your how are you going to spend that 3 hours? How do you get your head around using those 3 hours in order to make your life better, rather than opening yourself to the algorithmically refined attacks on your consciousness saying, pay attention to me, pay attention to me, pay attention to me, using every trick in the book, every emotional trick in the book. Like, this is a life-changing thing. This is complete morality. This is completely salacious. Oh my God, can you believe this happened? Right? It's like we're being algorithmically attacked. with people who are
Yes.
trying to get our 3 hours. Like, they're trying to get our 5 hours. They're trying to get our to use. Like, they're not doing it for us. They're not going, hey, what's good for you?
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah.
I care about you.
Yeah.
Where do I want to direct your attention?
Mhm.
How do you, in the face of that, how do you choose that, but not have it be dogma, not have it be oppressive of yourself? Yeah. Beyond order.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Boom. All right.
Okay,
So
cool.
one of these a week. We'll hit chapter 1 next time.
Yes. Rock on, brother.
All right.
Bye.
Boom. Bye.
This brings us to the end of this episode of Chaos, Logos, Order, where we apply the ideas of Jordan Peterson in order to create lives of increasingly heroic meaning. With our hosts, Guy Sengstock of thecirclinginstitute.com and Mark Michael Lewis from thegameofheroicmeaning.com. We're going through Jordan Peterson's new book, Beyond Order, chapter by chapter. In this episode, we went through the Overture. If you found this helpful and you want more, join us in our next episode as we go through Chapter 1, Do Not Carelessly Denigrate Social Institutions or Creative Achievement. And as always, we leave you with a challenge. Make your deepest happiness your highest priority.